So I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. I asked Lynne Franklin about the toughest audience that she has ever faced. Lynne said it was when she was a counselor in a home for troubled boys. One of her kids, a 14-year-old named Fred, threatened to kill her with a machete. True story. Then Fred chopped the phone cord, her only lifeline, and told her if she tried to call for help, he'd cut her too. 20 minutes later, after she did some pretty fast talking and sweated through everything she had on, Fred gave her the knife. Lynne says that's the litmus test for her job. As long as no one pulls a machete on her, she's having a good day. That qualified her to write a book called Getting Others to Do What You Want. She brought a few extra copies for people who want to dive deeper into what she shares today. Lynne's also given a TEDx talk on how to be a mind reader. And this TEDx has gone viral with about 2.8 million views. So we have a bona fide celebrity in our midst. Now she'll help us discover how to design our speeches to appeal to the hearts and minds of our audiences and keep their butts in the seats. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Lynne Franklin.
Thank you. There was a time when I traveled the country 1 week a month, teaching workshops that would have you envious. Title of the workshop: Finance and Accounting for Non-Financial Managers, for people who are afraid of numbers. Okay, so let me feel the wave of horror and pity. And I would ask people, so why did you come to this thing? And the response was universal. My boss made me. So now I'm in front of a room of people who don't want to be there. And if that isn't bad enough, it's a 2-day workshop. So I have to say enough things to help them want to actually come back the next day. That's when I decided I need to figure out how to reach people when they don't necessarily want to be reached, and I'm standing at the front of the room. And I started to pay attention to neuroscience, how the brain works. And I became a neuroscience nerd. And what that means to you is that I study how the brain works, I read the boring arcane research, and then I figure out, now that I know this, how can I take this and create tips and tricks and practical ideas to connect with people, to do it faster. And because I've studied brains of speakers and brains of audiences, let me share with you a couple of things I learned. And we'll start with your brain. So let's take a trip way, way back in the days when we all lived in the jungle. And our brains had one job. And that job was to keep us alive, which meant our brains were constantly scanning the horizon, looking for physical and verbal risks and threats, and getting us out of the way. Your brain is still doing this today. And I call this part of your brain your inner actuary. So anytime you're about to do something you've never done before, or something that you've done before sometimes, your inner actuary is looking to see what's the risk profile on this. And if it is anything more than 0, your inner actuary starts flooding your brain with pictures of all the horrible things that could possibly happen to you. So when your inner actuary sees speak up and stand out, it says, no, sit down and shut up. It's safer, don't do that. But you can't live there. It's no fun if you take all the risk out of your life. So let's figure out how to address your inner actuary. Because most of us squelch this stuff. We try to tamp it down and not pay attention, and that never works. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to calm our body, which will help calm our inner actuary. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep breath, 4 beats inhale, 4 beats exhale. Let's do it together. Inhale, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. Exhale, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. Okay, so now you've started to calm your body, which calms your mind. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to release that inner actuary. And we're going to talk about what are all of the horrible things that could happen to you if you're standing in front of an audience. All right, so and this is interactive, so just shout out. What are some of the terrible things that could happen to you if you stand up and speak? Just shout them out. Okay, forget what you're saying. Okay, some others? People walk out. People take phone calls, right? They're on their phone. They heckle you. You trip and fall. You know, or for me, it's this. It's I standing up, I've got great content, I'm doing my wonderful delivery, and yes, yawn, people are falling asleep. Or my particular favorite is this guy. Okay, here's the truth about your brain as a speaker, and all of our brains, is that your brain cannot tell the difference between something you imagine and something that's actually happening. It treats them both as real and elevates your fear. You know, and it's amazing. You shared all of those ideas. It's kind of surprising that you showed up for something that says speak up and stand out with all that noise going on in your brain. But here's what we're going to do this morning. Now that we've calmed your body and you know that your brain has manufactured all these pictures that are not for real, we're going to calm your mind by giving you some good information on things you can do before and during your program to calm that inner actuary and also connect with your audience. Sound like a good way to spend the next 20 minutes or so? Say yes.
Yes.
Okay, so before, here are some things I've learned from neuroscience. My top 3. And the first one, the 2 minds rule. And we've already started talking about this a little bit. You have in your brain 2 minds, conscious and subconscious. And your conscious mind, for example, can handle between 10 to 50 bits of information per second. Your subconscious mind can handle about 14 million bits of information per second. So your subconscious mind, for example, right now knows how your derriere feels in the chair. How many of you are thinking about how your butt feels in the seat now? Right, and 5 seconds ago, you weren't. But the scoop is that your subconscious mind was collecting this information, and until you tell it something's important, it just keeps it down there. So for you, as you're designing a program, one of the beauties is that you can ask yourself a question. You can ask your subconscious mind for information, and it will bubble this stuff up for you. It could be that you're wondering, where do I do the next great exercise to illustrate this point? Or where do I find more information on this? And your subconscious mind will bubble it up. And you've had this experience. How many of you have ever thought about, well, there's this kid in high school and I cannot for the life of me remember his name? And then you wake up at 2 in the morning and the name is there. Right. So what's going on is you ask your subconscious mind a question and it chews on it, and then it sends stuff up to you. Use this as you're designing your programs. It's really cool. Important thing to know about your subconscious mind, however, is that it cannot tell the difference between a positive message and a negative message. So if you're about to take the stage and you're thinking, gosh, they're never going to buy this stuff. Guess what? Your subconscious mind here's never going to buy this stuff, and it will find a way for you to shoot yourself in the foot every time. Only feed your subconscious mind positive stuff. One of the most powerful things I do before I'm going to speak is I actually set goals. And I will never ask you to do anything that I won't do. So I set 3 goals for myself today. The first is about you. I wanted you to come and laugh and learn and walk away with at least one new idea you could use right away to do a better job of connecting people for your next program. My second goal is for me. I want to be the best version of myself, not just when I'm standing up here, but throughout the course of the day. And the third is the goal for my business, which is I want to give such value and help you have such a good time learning neuroscience that you'll be happy to introduce me to people who need what I do and help me expand my business. Do those things for yourself. Be intentional before you take the stage. It's really useful. Next thing is the rule of 3. Know this. People can only hold 3 ideas in their short-term memory without being overloaded. 3 ideas, that's it. My line about this is, so if you stand in front of a group and there are 5 things you want to share with them, by the time you get to number 4, they have lost number 1, and chances are good you're standing in number 2. When you design your programs, design them around 3. It's magic. And Bill and Kimmy were talking before about people who do keynotes. There is a formula for a keynote address, which starts out with a story of some sort that brings in the audience. And then the format is point number 1, story, takeaway. Point number 2, story, takeaway. Point number 3, story, takeaway. Summary and call to action. So there's the format for a keynote, and it is based on neuroscience. People can only remember 3 things. When you are designing your programs, remember the power of 3. Don't give people too much information because it overloads them, and they're not going to go where you need them to go. Then next, we have the 7-second rule, one of my personal favorites. The most powerful word in the English language to any one of us is our first name. How many of you have had this experience? You've come to an event like today, you're talking with a person you've never met before, who probably doesn't have a name badge on, and you're chatting for a while, and you realize about 2 minutes in, you cannot for the life of you remember that person's name. Raise your hand if this has happened to you. Yeah, right. Okay, and then your friend comes over and wants you to introduce this person to him, and you are tap dancing like crazy because you cannot for the life of you remember that person's name. Here's what goes on inside your head. Here's the neuroscience of it, and what you're going to be doing differently in the future. First, know that your brain, when you meet a new person, for the first 7 seconds, is overloaded with information. We start with people's hair. And those of you who are follically challenged, I'm sorry. But hair is the first thing we notice about people. Then we're noticing their face and their body language and their clothes and how they sound, all these things. And all this information is bombarding us. For the first 7 seconds after we meet somebody, we have no bandwidth. And guess what? That's usually when we introduce ourselves, right? So no bandwidth. The other tough thing about people's names is that names have no inherent meaning in the brain, unless you already know somebody who has that name. So, if I were to stand up here and say, my name is Blue, well, you have an association with Blue. It makes it easy. But if I say, my name's Norma, and you've never met a Norma before in your life, your brain just goes, pfft. So all these things conspire against you to remember anybody's name. Here's what you're going to do in the future, now that you know about the 7-second rule. You are never going to introduce yourself to somebody within the first 7 seconds of having met them. You got no bandwidth. Instead, you're going to ask a question. Geez, is this the first time you've ever been to a speaking event like this? And let them answer. Or you're going to make a statement. Boy, whatever happened to fall? It's cold out there. It feels like winter already. And let them respond. So you make a statement or ask a question, let somebody respond, and by that point, 7 seconds have gone by. And then you can ask the person's name. And then you look her in the eyes and say, Marilyn, pleasure to meet you.
You too, Lynn.
So Marilyn, tell me more about why you're here today. And then Marilyn will talk to me about these things. And I'll keep looking at her in the face and saying her name, and that will make the connection for me between my short-term and my long-term memory. And the beauty about this is that whenever you are doing a program anyplace, the smart thing for you to do is to go out and talk to people in the audience first. And ask them questions. A lot of times I talk about how to be the most persuasive person in the room. So I ask people, what's a situation where you want to be more persuasive? And then during the program, I can do a track back to that person. And I can say, Ruth shared with me this idea of where she wants to be more persuasive. So what happens is that Ruth is now my biggest fan because I've mentioned her name. Other people in the audience are thrilled because that means I've talked to people here. And that means I'm not just giving some canned program. I'm making it about them. And the other person who's thrilled is the person who hired you. But you can't do these things unless you remember somebody's name. So that's the 7-second rule. Never again in your life introduce yourself or ask somebody else's name in the first 7 seconds. Your brain just can't handle it. So now let's move into the during stuff while you're speaking. It's good to know that people's brains work in 3 different ways. People think in 3 different ways. 75% of the people in your audience will be visual thinkers. They think in pictures and images. And you can tell because they give you lots of eye contact. If you want to appeal to 75% of the people in your audience, use visual language. I see what you mean. Or picture this. Because those are the kinds of words they are using in their heads. You are literally speaking their language. Pay attention to your language, use visual words. It brings in 75% of the people. 20% of the people in your audience will be listeners. And these are people who think in words and sounds. And the fact that you're a speaker means you're automatically reaching these people, because that's how they like to get information. One thing that's interesting about listeners, though, is they do not give you lots of eye contact. So if there are people sitting in your audience not looking at you, it doesn't mean that they're ignoring you. Most often, listeners have their ears pointed at you because they want to hear what you have to say. So know this and don't get self-conscious. Because I've heard some speakers say, I see one person in the audience who's not looking at me, and I just stare at that person the whole time until they do look at me. It's like, no, listeners don't like that. So know that there are some people who aren't interested. And then also know you need to use words that talk about sounds when you want to appeal to listeners. So that sounds good to me, or hear me out, or things like that. Because once again, that's the language that's going on inside their heads. The third group of people, touchers. Not what you think. These are people who process information through feelings and tactily. Only about 5% of the people in the world do this. And you know them because they're the people who are usually willing to give you a giant bear hug whether or not you've ever met them before in your life. Because what they're trying to do is decrease the amount of physical space between you and them. That's how they build rapport. You want to reach out to these people in your audience, and 5% of your audience is these people. Then you use feeling and tactile words. How does this feel to you? Or let's get in touch about this, or I want you to get in touch with yourself about this. So you're using the language they use inside their heads. Make sure your language invites everybody in the room. And if you want to know more about this, Bill talked about the TEDx talk I did, which is how to be a mind reader. Just search online for Lynne Franklin TEDx, and it delves into the subject. You can figure out who you are and how to create connection with other people who think in different ways. Which then takes us to the 7-minute rule. And the 7-minute rule is that people can only sit and listen to a talking head for 7 minutes without taking a brain vacation. So Kimi was talking before about her professor who stood up and spoke boringly. And she remembers him well because he was boring. And she wanted to be anywhere but there. Chances are he was going more than 7 minutes without changing. The phrase, the jargon for this in the neuroscience world is you need to create a state change. Every 7 minutes, you need to change the level of the energy in the room. And there are a number of different ways you can do this, and we're going to practice a bunch of them. First, the first state change you can create is applause. So everybody, clap your hands. Good. Okay, next state change, ask people to raise their hands. Raise your hands. Right. Next state change, you can ask people to ask you a question. Just shout out a question.
What's your name?
What's my name? Darned if I know at this moment. Norma. Yeah, Norma. Okay. Or ask people to talk to each other. Or ask people to, here's my personal favorite. I was speaking at a storytelling workshop, and I had the coveted 3 o'clock in the afternoon spot. And I was the final speaker. And the person who had been there before me, no fault of her own, not a professional speaker, she had sucked the life out of the room. And so I'm looking at all these people, and not even the lookers are giving me eye contact. That's how low the energy level was in this room. And I said, okay, everybody stand up. So, okay, everybody stand up. Literally, you guys stand up. And I said, okay, so what I want you to do now is go, do it. Okay, do it again. Okay, sit down. It's amazing what you can get people to do when you're standing in the front of a room. But here's the truth. You sat down more energized than when you stood up, right? So if the idea is that you need to be paying attention to your audience throughout the entire program. Know where they are, know when you need to bring them back. And know that at least every 7 minutes in your program, you need to be giving people an exercise. It can even be something as simple as asking them to imagine something. So it doesn't always have to have a big physical disruption thing. But you need to change the level of energy in the room, because otherwise people zone out or they're on their phones. And then they can't get the value that you're trying to deliver to them. State changes. Build them into your program every 7 minutes. It keeps your audience with you. And then that takes us to the 20-minute rule. And the 20-minute rule is that people's short-term memories can only hold about 20 minutes worth of content before they're full. Like, so how many times have you sat through that program that went on forever? And, and then you never know what to do with the information you're getting, because your brain has reached capacity. And then you start getting really peeved with the person who keeps feeding you information and you've got no place to put it. So no, 20 minutes is all that people can hold. The part of their brain that is in charge of this is called the hippocampus. And I say after every 20 minutes, you need to lead everybody in a hippocampus dump. You need to clear out their short-term memory in order to give them more space to do other things. So short-term memory, a lot of times we clear it out by giving people a chance to talk about things or somehow incorporate stuff. That's one of the beauties of being a speaker for most of us. We create what we do in modules. So there are different sections of things that we go through. And then we give people a chance to incorporate what we've spoken about and then use that and move on. Because once again, it clears out space in their short-term memory. It allows people to track with you rather than die on the vine, because we've all been in those kinds of audiences. Design your content that way. It's really useful. Okay, so now here's the +1. Neuroscience tells all of us that next week, a week from now, you will have forgotten 80% of what you've learned here today. That's just the sad news. It doesn't have to be that way, though. What that means is that it helps when you build in an accountability exercise in your programs and end with it. And rather than telling you about it, let's just do it. So everybody stand up again. And what I want you to do is look at the people around you and pick somebody you don't know well and go stand next to that person. That's a buddy. So pick yourself a buddy. Okay, everybody got a buddy? If you don't have a buddy, raise your hand. We want to find buddies for everybody. Anybody need a buddy? Good. Okay, so of course I'm in a room with speakers. And y'all want to talk to yourselves. But indulge me for a minute, because this is really useful. Now what I want you to do is pick an A and a B, and A, you'll be the person with the longest hair, or in some instances, hair. Okay. Yeah, make a judgment call if it's close. Okay, so A, you have a job. And A, your job is for 1 minute, you are going to explain to B some of the big things, the big ideas that you picked up so far. And B, you also have a job. And your job is to listen attentively and supportingly to A, to take in all the wonderful information that A is sharing with you. No conversation, just listen. Go. Okay, finish that thought. Right. Turnabout is now fair play. So B, it is your job to spend the next minute explaining to A, some of the good stuff that you learned, and A, it's your job to listen attentively and supportingly to B. Go. Okay, finish that thought. Okay. So rather than me standing up here and saying, we learned about this, we learned about this, we learned about this, you've all just taught each other. Because did your buddy teach you something that you'd forgotten about? Yeah, and vice versa. Okay, so now what I want you to do is go back to your buddy, and B, you go first this time. And you have 30 seconds to tell your buddy the one thing you are going to do in the course of the next week because you were here. All those great ideas, you're going to pick one. And my overachievers know you can't have 3. One thing you're going to do in the course of the next week because you were here for this program. You have 30 seconds. B, you tell A, you listen, go. Okay, finish that thought. And now, A, it's your turn. You tell B the one thing you're going to do in the course of the next week because you were here, and B, you listen attentively. Go. Okay, finish that thought. All right. How you feeling about your buddy? You like your buddy? You want your buddy to get what your buddy wants? Yeah. Okay, so let me throw cold water on you. We make promises to ourselves we're going to change all the time. We are full of crap. You know, a week from now, you're going to think, yeah, what was that thing I was going to do? Well, I just really never had time. So here's what you're going to do. Before the end of today, you're going to connect with your buddy, you're going to pull out your phones, and you are going to set up a 10-minute accountability call. 1 week or a week and a half from today, since it's a Saturday. And you're going to report, because everybody can find 10 minutes. You're going to report back to your buddy on the thing that you promised and the progress that you made or didn't make. Because once again, we make promises to ourselves, we don't hold ourselves accountable, but you don't want your buddy to think that you're a big old slacker. And so you'll do this stuff then because the goal is you come to a program to take information into the real world. So right now what I want you to do is thank your buddy because a break is about to come up. Thank your buddy. Have a seat. Okay. Thank your buddy. Have a seat. Yeah, I've lost control. Okay. So here you go. I started telling you about, yes, finance and accounting for non-financial managers, the world's most boring subject. Yeah, and I got no pushback from you that it was not the world's most boring subject. But here's what happened. By learning neuroscience and learning how to design a program that keeps people interested, and then actually execute a program where people were talking to each other and doing accountability stuff, it saved my butt and it kept their butts in the seats. And I actually had people come up to me afterwards and say, what else do you teach? I need to take something else. It's like, whoa. So I'm here to tell you, this neuroscience stuff really works. And when you pay attention to how you design your program, and you pay attention to the energy level of the people in the audience, you can keep people there. So they want to hear what you have to share because you do have a message, otherwise you wouldn't be speaking anyway. Use this stuff. It works. And if you have any questions, we're coming up on a 15-minute break. Happy to answer those questions for you. And as Kimi mentioned, I've actually set up a tripod over there in the back of the room, down the stairs. If you felt like you got something good out of what I had to share, I would appreciate you standing in front of a camera and saying a couple of things in support of me. Thanks so much for playing with me today.
Lynne Franklin. Fantastic. I know I learned a lot in that. I hope you were taking great notes, and that's what we hope to do as we move forward.